The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Eleanor Morrison's bedroom in her Charleston home, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floor. At 72, Eleanor moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned to respect her body's limits while refusing to be defined by them. Today was special. Her youngest granddaughter, Sophie, was getting married at the historic Magnolia Plantation, and Eleanor had been preparing for this moment for months. She stood before her full-length mirror, adjusting the pearl necklace that had been her mother's. The lavender dress she'd chosen complemented her silver hair, which she'd had styled at her favorite salon the previous day. Eleanor smiled at her reflection, remembering how her late husband Charles would have complimented her appearance. "You still got it, Ellie," she whispered to herself, using the nickname only he had called her. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the window, she could see her eldest grandson, Marcus, standing at the front door. Her heart lifted. Marcus was 32, successful in real estate and usually too busy to visit. She hurried downstairs, her joints protesting slightly, but her excitement overriding any discomfort. "Marcus, darling." Eleanor opened the door with a warm smile. "What a wonderful surprise. I didn't expect to see you until the ceremony." Marcus stood there in his expensive suit, his expression unreadable. He was handsome in that polished way that came from good genes and better grooming, but Eleanor noticed the tightness around his eyes, the impatient tap of his Italian leather shoe against her porch. "Grandmother," he said, his tone formal and cool, "I need to talk to you about the seating arrangements." Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. "The seating arrangements? But Sophie and her mother have been planning this for months. Everything's already set." "That's the problem," Marcus said, pushing past her into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "I just found out you're seated at the family table while I'm relegated to table 3 with the cousins." Eleanor closed the door slowly, trying to understand his concern. "Well, yes, dear. Sophie wanted her grandparents at the main table. You know how close we are. And table 3 is still in the front section. It's a lovely spot." Marcus's face flushed red. "A lovely spot? Grandmother, do you have any idea who I am? I'm the vice president of Morrison Real Estate Development. I've closed deals worth millions this year alone, and you think it's appropriate for me to sit with cousin Jenny and her unemployed boyfriend while you, who haven't worked a day in 40 years, get the place of honor?" The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She gripped the banister for support, not from physical weakness, but from the emotional impact of his cruelty. "Marcus, I don't understand why you're so upset. This is Sophie's day, not—" "Of course you don't understand," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "You've never understood anything about the real world, have you? Living in this old house, clipping coupons, wearing the same jewelry for decades. Do you know how embarrassing it is when my business associates ask about my family, and I have to mention my grandmother who still drives a 15-year-old Buick?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "That Buick runs perfectly well, and I don't see how my choice of vehicle affects your business dealings. It's about image, grandmother. Perception. Something your generation never grasped." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through it as he spoke. "I'm calling Sophie right now. This needs to be fixed. You can sit with the other elderly relatives at table 7. Mrs. Patterson will be there. You two can talk about your bridge games or whatever it is you do at that senior center." "Marcus Morrison, you will do no such thing," Eleanor said, her voice finding strength. "You will not disturb Sophie on her wedding day with your petty concerns about status." Marcus looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing. "Petty? You think my career is petty? Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to overcome the embarrassment of being associated with—" He gestured around the modest but well-maintained home. "This? While my competitors come from families with real wealth, real influence, I'm stuck explaining why my grandmother clips coupons and shops at discount stores. Your grandfather and I built this life through hard work and careful saving," Eleanor said quietly. "We raised your mother with values that— Values don't pay for country club memberships or secure business deals," Marcus snapped. "God, you're so naive. Do you think anyone cares about your values when you show up to family events in that ancient dress you've probably had since the 80s? Eleanor glanced down at her carefully chosen outfit, her hands trembling slightly. "This dress is new. I bought it specifically for Sophie's wedding." "From where? The clearance rack at JCPenney?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You have no idea how you reflect on the rest of us. At least if you're sitting at table 7, the photographers won't get as many shots of you near the actual family." The cruelty of his words finally broke through Eleanor's composure. A single tear escaped, trailing down her carefully made-up cheek. "I see," she said softly. "I embarrass you." "Finally, some awareness," Marcus said, pocketing his phone. "Look, I'll handle the seating change myself. Just Try not to draw attention to yourself at the reception, okay? And maybe skip the family photos. We're trying to create a certain image for Sophie's wedding album. Eleanor watched her grandson stride toward the door, his shoulders set with self-righteous satisfaction. Marcus, she called out, her voice steady despite her tears. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. He paused at the door, turning back with a smirk. Grandfather's dead, grandmother, and his old-fashioned ideas about family and loyalty died with him. This is the real world now. Image matters. Success matters. Not. He looked her up and down dismissively. Whatever this is. The door slammed behind him, leaving Eleanor alone in her foyer. She sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The house felt eerily quiet, filled only with the ticking of the grandfather clock Charles had restored with his own hands. Eleanor sat there for several minutes, allowing herself to cry, not just for the cruel words, but for the loss of the little boy Marcus had once been, the child who used to run to her house after school, eager for her homemade cookies and warm hugs. When had that sweet boy transformed into this cold, status-obsessed man? Finally, she wiped her eyes and stood up. She walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, her hands still shaking. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet Sophie had made in elementary school, was a photo from last Christmas. The whole family gathered around Eleanor's dining table, Marcus sitting right beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Had he been pretending even then? The phone rang, startling her. It was her daughter, Patricia, Marcus's mother. Mom, I just wanted to check if you need a ride to the venue. Tom and I can swing by in about an hour. Eleanor hesitated. Should she tell Patricia about Marcus's visit? No, she decided. This was Sophie's day, and she wouldn't let anything ruin it. That would be lovely, dear, Eleanor said, forcing warmth into her voice. I'll be ready. Are you okay, Mom? You sound a bit off. Just emotional about our little Sophie getting married. Eleanor lied smoothly. You know how sentimental I get. After hanging up, Eleanor climbed the stairs back to her bedroom. She stood before the mirror again, but this time she saw herself through Marcus's eyes. Was her dress really so terrible? Was her jewelry outdated? Did she really embarrass her family simply by existing as she was? She thought about changing, about calling Patricia to say she felt ill and couldn't attend. But then she saw Charles's photo on her dresser, and she could almost hear his voice. Don't you let anyone dim your light, Ellie. You're worth a dozen of those pompous peacocks. Eleanor straightened her shoulders and reapplied her lipstick. She would go to Sophie's wedding. She would sit wherever she was placed. And she would hold her head high because she had nothing to be ashamed of. Her life might not impress Marcus, but it had been filled with love, integrity, and genuine connections, things that, apparently, her grandson had never learned to value. She picked up her purse and went downstairs to wait for Patricia. As she passed through the living room, her eyes fell on a framed document hanging on the wall, Charles's last will and testament, which he'd insisted on displaying to keep the vultures at bay, as he used to joke. Eleanor had always thought it was morbid, but Charles had found it amusing. She paused, reading the familiar words, and a thought occurred to her. Charles had been very specific about certain conditions in his will, conditions that Eleanor, as executor, had never needed to enforce. She'd always assumed all their grandchildren would naturally embody the values Charles had held dear. A car horn honked outside. Patricia had arrived. Eleanor took one last look at the will, then grabbed her shawl and headed for the door. Sophie's wedding would be beautiful, regardless of where she sat. And as for Marcus, well, perhaps it was time he learned that there were some things more valuable than image and status. The drive to Magnolia Plantation was subdued, with Patricia chattering about last-minute wedding details while Eleanor gazed out the window, lost in thought. The historic venue was stunning, with ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss and gardens bursting with azaleas and camellias. Guests were already arriving, and Eleanor recognized many faces from their close-knit Charleston community. As they entered the venue, Eleanor immediately spotted Marcus near the bar, holding court with a group of young professionals. He was gesturing animatedly, no doubt regaling them with some story about his latest business triumph. When his eyes met Eleanor's across the room, his expression hardened. He turned his back to her deliberately, pulling his companions further away. "Mom, there's Sophie," Patricia said, pointing toward the bridal suite. "She wanted to see you before the ceremony. Why don't you go say hello while I find Tom?" Eleanor made her way through the elegantly decorated hallway to the bridal suite. She knocked softly, and Sophie's voice called out, "Come in!" The sight of her granddaughter in her wedding dress took Eleanor's breath away. Sophie was radiant, her face glowing with happiness. "Grandma, I'm so glad you're here. You look absolutely beautiful." "Oh, my dear girl," Eleanor said, embracing Sophie carefully to avoid wrinkling the dress. You're the one who's beautiful. Your grandfather would have been so proud. I wish he could be here, Sophie said, her eyes misting. But having you here means everything to me. That's why I wanted you at the family table. You're not just my grandmother. You're my role model. The way you and Grandpa loved each other, the home you built, the way you've always been there for all of us. That's what I want for my marriage. Eleanor felt fresh tears threaten, but these were tears of joy and gratitude. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know. Actually, Grandma, there's something I wanted to tell you, Sophie said, taking Eleanor's hands. David and I have decided to delay our honeymoon for a week. We wanted to have a family dinner next Saturday. Something intimate, just the immediate family. Would you host it at your house? I know it's a lot to ask, but your dining room has all our best family memories, and I wanted to start our married life surrounded by that love. Of course, darling, I'd be honored. A knock at the door interrupted them. 5 minutes, Sophie, the wedding coordinator called. I should let you finish getting ready, Eleanor said, kissing Sophie's cheek. I'll see you out there. As Eleanor left the bridal suite, she nearly collided with Marcus in the hallway. He was adjusting his boutonniere, and his face darkened when he saw her. Still here, I see, he said coldly. I thought you might have taken the hint and gone home. Sophie asked to see me, Eleanor replied calmly. This is her day, Marcus. Whatever issues you have with me, please don't let them spoil her wedding. The only thing spoiling it is having to explain to my colleagues why my grandmother looks like she stepped out of a charity shop, Marcus hissed. Do you see what the other grandmothers are wearing? Designer dresses, real jewelry, not some dusty pearls from the Depression era. These pearls have been in our family for generations, Eleanor said quietly. They've seen more love and joy than all the designer jewelry in this room combined. Marcus rolled his eyes. Spare me the sentimental garbage. Just stay out of my way. He brushed past her, heading toward the ceremony space. Eleanor took a deep breath and followed at a distance. The ceremony space was breathtaking, with white chairs arranged facing a flower-covered arch. She found her seat at the family table right in the front, trying not to notice Marcus's glare from table 3. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Sophie and David exchanged vows they'd written themselves, speaking of love, partnership, and building a life together based on mutual respect and shared values. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, remembering her own wedding to Charles all those years ago. During the reception, Eleanor tried to enjoy herself despite the weight of the morning's confrontation. She danced with Tom, chatted with old friends, and watched Sophie and David's first dance with a full heart. But she couldn't help noticing Marcus's behavior throughout the evening. He drank heavily, made loud, boastful comments to anyone who would listen, and seemed determined to make his presence known despite his inferior seating assignment. At one point during the speeches, Marcus managed to grab the microphone after the best man's toast. I'd like to say a few words, he announced, his words slightly slurred. As the most successful member of the Morrison family, I think it's important to give the newlyweds some advice. Eleanor watched in growing horror as Marcus launched into a speech about the importance of image, networking, and not settling for mediocrity. He made veiled references to family members who hadn't amounted to much, and stressed how David needed to step up his game if he wanted to be worthy of the Morrison name. The room grew increasingly uncomfortable as Marcus rambled on. Sophie's face had gone from confused to hurt to angry. David's jaw was clenched. Finally, the wedding coordinator managed to extract the microphone from Marcus's grip, announcing it was time for the cake cutting. Eleanor escaped to the garden, needing air. The night was warm and humid, typical for Charleston in late spring. She found a bench near the fountain and sat down, trying to process the day's events. How had things gone so wrong? How had she failed so badly in transmitting values to her grandson? Mrs. Morrison? Eleanor looked up to see David standing nearby, looking concerned. David, shouldn't you be inside with Sophie? She sent me to find you, he said, sitting beside her. She saw you leave and was worried. That speech, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. I'm the one who should apologize, Eleanor said. Marcus's behavior was inexcusable. David shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for. Sophie's told me so much about you and Mr. Morrison, about the life you built together, the values you instilled in your family. Most of them took root. Just look at Sophie, at her mother. Marcus, well, sometimes people choose their own path despite the best examples. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before David spoke again. Sophie wanted me to tell you something. We've been talking about where to settle after the honeymoon, and we've decided to look for a house in your neighborhood. She wants our kids to grow up near their great-grandmother, to have the kind of childhood memories she has of your home. Eleanor felt tears well up again. That would be wonderful. We should head back in. David said, offering his arm. "Sophie's about to throw the bouquet, and she insisted you be there." As they walked back to the reception, Eleanor felt a mix of emotions: pride in Sophie and the woman she'd become, sadness for the relationship with Marcus that seemed irreparably broken, but also a strange sense of resolve. Charles had always said that actions had consequences, and that values matter more than valuables. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Eleanor stayed until the end, dancing with Sophie one last time before the couple departed in a shower of rose petals. As guests began to leave, Eleanor looked for Marcus to attempt one more conversation, but he had disappeared, likely off to some after-party with his business associates. Patricia drove Eleanor home, both women quiet in the car. As they pulled up to Eleanor's house, Patricia finally spoke. "Mom, I heard about what Marcus said to you this morning." Eleanor looked at her daughter in surprise. "How did you—" Mrs. Patterson was in the garden when he was ranting. She heard everything through the window. Patricia's face was tight with anger. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know where we went wrong with him." "You didn't go wrong, dear," Eleanor said gently. "Sometimes people make choices that have nothing to do with how they were raised. Marcus has chosen to value things that your father and I never found important. Still, the way he spoke to you, it's unforgivable." Eleanor patted her daughter's hand. "Let me worry about Marcus. You just focus on Sophie and this beautiful day. Don't let his behavior taint the memory." After Patricia left, Eleanor went inside her quiet house. She hung up her dress carefully, placed her pearls back in their velvet box, and sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. The house felt different somehow, as if the day's events had changed something fundamental. She thought about the family dinner Sophie had requested for next Saturday. Marcus would certainly be invited. Sophie wouldn't exclude him despite his behavior. Eleanor would have to face him again, sit across from him at her dining table, and pretend that he hadn't torn her heart to shreds with his cruel words. But as she sipped her tea, Eleanor's mind kept returning to Charles's will on the living room wall. Her husband had been a wise man, perhaps wiser than she'd ever given him credit for. He'd seen something she'd missed, had prepared for a possibility she'd never wanted to consider. Eleanor finished her tea and went to bed, but sleep eluded her. She lay in the darkness, replaying the day's events, Marcus's words echoing in her mind. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would host the family dinner as Sophie requested, but she would also have a conversation with her lawyer on Monday morning. Charles had always said that inheritance was about more than money. It was about carrying forward the values and principles that mattered. If Marcus had rejected those values so completely, perhaps it was time to consider whether he should inherit anything at all. The sun rose over Charleston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Eleanor stood at her bedroom window watching the light spread across her garden. The bougainvillea Charles had planted for their 40th anniversary was in full bloom, a riot of purple against the white fence. She thought about Sophie and David, starting their new life together, about Patricia and Tom, who had raised their children with love and principles, about the grandchildren who still called her regularly, who valued her stories and her presence in their lives. And she thought about Marcus, alone in his expensive apartment, surrounded by all the trappings of success but empty of the connections that truly mattered. She felt sorry for him, but she also felt resolved. Some lessons could only be learned through consequences. Eleanor dressed in her comfortable Saturday clothes, the ones Marcus would undoubtedly mock, and went downstairs to start her day. She had a week to prepare for the family dinner, a week to decide exactly how to handle the situation with Marcus. But first, she would tend her garden, call her friends, and live her life exactly as she always had, with dignity, grace, and the knowledge that true worth had nothing to do with designer clothes or luxury cars. As she stepped into her garden, pruning shears in hand, Eleanor smiled. Charles had always said she was stronger than she knew. Perhaps it was time to prove him right. Gawk Chapter 2. The Family Dinner. The week following Sophie's wedding passed with an unusual mixture of anticipation and dread for Eleanor. She spent her days preparing for the family dinner, polishing silver that had been in the Morrison family for generations, ironing the linen tablecloth that had graced countless family gatherings, and planning a menu that would honor Sophie's new beginning while maintaining the traditions that had always anchored their family celebrations. On Monday morning, as promised to herself, Eleanor had met with Harold Pemberton, the family lawyer who had handled Charles's estate and had known the Morrisons for over 30 years. The meeting had been illuminating. Harold had pulled out Charles's will and carefully reviewed the provisions that Eleanor had almost forgotten existed. Charles was very specific about this clause, Harold had explained, adjusting his reading glasses. He'd seen too many families torn apart by money and wanted to ensure that the Morrison legacy went to those who would honor it, not just profit from it. Eleanor had left the office with a heavy heart, but a clear conscience. The decisions that needed to be made were difficult, but they were also necessary. Charles had been right to plan for this possibility, even if Eleanor had hoped it would never come to pass. Now, on Saturday afternoon, Eleanor stood in her dining room, arranging fresh flowers from her garden in the crystal vase that had been a wedding gift from Charles's mother. The table was set for 8. Sophie and David, Patricia and Tom, Marcus, his younger sister Rebecca with her husband James, and Eleanor herself. The good china gleamed in the afternoon light, and the smell of pot roast, Sophie's favorite, filled the house. The doorbell rang at precisely 5 o'clock. Sophie and David arrived first, Sophie carrying a bottle of wine and a bouquet of roses. "Grandma, the house smells amazing," Sophie said, embracing Eleanor warmly. "Just like Sunday dinners when I was little." "That was the idea, dear," Eleanor replied, accepting the roses. "David, welcome to the family officially, though I've considered you part of it for quite some time already." David smiled, clearly more relaxed than he'd been at the wedding. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. Sophie's told me so many stories about dinners at this table. I'm honored to be part of the tradition." Patricia and Tom arrived next, Patricia carrying her famous apple pie. "Mom, you didn't have to go to all this trouble," she said, though her eyes were soft with appreciation as she took in the carefully set table. "It's no trouble at all," Eleanor assured her. "This is what I love doing." Rebecca and James came in shortly after, Rebecca immediately going to help Eleanor in the kitchen despite protests. "You know I can't sit still when there's work to be done, Grandma. Besides, I want to learn your green bean recipe. James has been begging me to recreate it." The comfortable chatter filled the house with warmth, everyone gravitating toward the kitchen as families do, sharing stories from the week and helping with final preparations. Eleanor felt her heart ease slightly. This was what family meant, this easy cooperation, this genuine interest in each other's lives. At 5:30, with dinner ready and everyone gathered in the living room with drinks, Marcus still hadn't arrived. Sophie checked her phone, frowning. He said he'd be here. Maybe he's stuck in traffic? "You know how Marcus is about being fashionably late," Rebecca said, though her tone suggested this wasn't a trait she admired. Finally, at 10 to 6, Marcus's BMW pulled into the driveway. Eleanor watched through the window as he sat in his car for a full minute, apparently finishing a phone call. When he finally entered, he didn't apologize for his lateness. "Grandmother," he said coolly, handing her an expensive bottle of scotch. "For your liquor cabinet, though I doubt you have anything suitable to mix it with." "Thank you, Marcus," Eleanor replied graciously, choosing to ignore the barb. "We were just about to sit down for dinner." The family moved to the dining room, and Eleanor noticed Marcus's slight sneer as he took in the traditional table setting. He sat down with an air of someone doing others a favor with his presence, immediately pulling out his phone. "Marcus, no phones at Grandma's dinner table," Sophie said gently. "You know the rules." "Seriously?" Marcus looked around the table. "We're still doing that? What is this, 1952? "It's called conversation," Rebecca said dryly. "You should try it sometime." Eleanor served the soup course, her mother's butternut squash recipe, and tried to steer the conversation toward pleasant topics. "Sophie, tell us about your honeymoon plans." Sophie's face lit up. "We've decided on Italy. 2 weeks traveling through Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast. David's been learning Italian on one of those apps." "Buonasera, familia," David said with an exaggerated accent, making everyone laugh, except Marcus, who rolled his eyes. "Italy's overrated," Marcus commented, stirring his soup without eating it. "Everybody goes to Italy. If you wanted to make a real impression, you should have chosen somewhere exclusive. I just got back from a private island in the Maldives. Now that's a honeymoon destination." "We're not trying to impress anyone," David said mildly. "We're going where we want to go." "That's the problem with your generation," Marcus said, finally taking a sip of soup and immediately making a face. "No ambition? No vision? You settle for ordinary when you could have extraordinary." "Marcus," Tom warned, his usually jovial face serious. "What?" "I'm trying to help them think bigger." Marcus pushed his soup bowl away. "Though I suppose when you're used to—" He gestured around the dining room. "This, ordinary, seems special." Eleanor felt the family tense around the table. She stood to clear the soup bowls, but Sophie jumped up. "Let me help." "Grandma." In the kitchen, Sophie whispered, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into him lately. He's always been a bit much, but this is new." "It's not your fault, dear," Eleanor assured her. "Let's just get through dinner. This is your celebration." They returned with the main course, pot roast with all the trimmings. Eleanor had spent hours preparing it, making sure everything was perfect. The family made appreciative noises, complimenting the meal, but Marcus just stared at his plate. "Pot roast again?" he said. "Grandmother, do you ever make anything that wasn't popular during the Eisenhower administration?" "Marcus!" Patricia's voice was sharp. That's enough. I'm just saying, there's a whole world of cuisine out there. Molecular gastronomy, fusion cooking, something that doesn't look like it came from a 1950s cookbook. This is Sophie's favorite meal, Eleanor said quietly. I made it for her. Of course you did, Marcus muttered. Everything's always about Sophie. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Rebecca cleared her throat. So, Mom told us you're looking at houses in the neighborhood, Sophie? Sophie grabbed the lifeline gratefully. Yes, there's a beautiful Victorian about 3 blocks from here. It needs some work. But David's handy, and we love the character. A fixer-upper? Marcus laughed derisively. Why am I not surprised? Let me guess. You're going to spend your weekends at Home Depot, pretending to be Chip and Joanna Gaines? Actually, yes, David said, his patience clearly wearing thin. We're excited about making it our own. With what money? Last I heard, teachers and graphic designers aren't exactly raking it in. Marcus took a large sip of wine. You'll be house poor before you know it. But hey, at least you'll be close to Grandma. She can teach Sophie all about clipping coupons and shopping sales. Eleanor set down her fork carefully. Marcus, I think… You know what? I've been thinking, Marcus interrupted, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. This whole family needs a reality check. Do you know why I'm successful? Because I didn't buy into this whole simple life mythology you all cling to. I saw what the real world values and I went after it. The real world? Rebecca's husband James spoke up for the first time, his mild manner belying the steel in his voice. You mean the world where you measure someone's worth by their car and their zip code? I mean the world where perception matters, Marcus shot back. Where the clothes you wear and the restaurants you frequent and the people you associate with determine your opportunities. Not this, he waved his hand dismissively. This shrine to mediocrity. Marcus Morrison, Patricia stood up, her face flushed with anger. You will not speak about your grandmother's home that way. This house has more love and history in it than all your fancy condos combined. Love doesn't pay bills, Mom, Marcus said coldly. History doesn't open doors. When was the last time any of you were invited to a charity gala? When did any of you network with people who actually matter? People who actually matter? Eleanor found her voice, though it trembled slightly. And who would those be, Marcus? The ones who judge you by your watch rather than your character? The ones who care more about your portfolio than your principles? Marcus turned to her with a look of disdain. Yes, grandmother. Those people. The ones who run this world while you sit in your outdated house polishing silver no one cares about and cooking meals from a bygone era. Do you think Sophie and David's kids will thank them for raising them in a falling-down Victorian when their classmates are living in gated communities? Our kids will thank us for raising them with values, Sophie said fiercely, for teaching them that family matters more than status symbols. Values, Marcus scoffed.